Dark Souls opens up with the player stuck in a dark and hopeless cell, before a mysterious knight drops the body holding a key from a little opening in the ceiling. This is actually one of the best openings to a video game ever made, and to understand why, we have to talk a little bit about video games in general. When games were new, they were extremely difficult. This is because at the time of the arcade, most games were very short, and had to compensate for that by being hard, preventing the player from beating them in a flash. Shortly, that age would close, and as time went on, games began getting larger and way more consumer friendly. Trying to stand out during this time was tough and almost impossible. However, there was a strange game being worked on in the shadows. Directed by the now famous Hidetaka Miyazaki, Demon's Souls. Released in 2009 and set in a dark fantasy world, heavily inspired by Kentaro Miura's legendary Berserk. Demon's Souls was an RPG adventure game notorious for being extremely difficult. While the game's initial reach did not extend much past Japan and some niche communities, its impact started a spark in the gaming community, as the game was widely regarded as a breath of fresh air with a well-designed concept. I think the reason why Demon's Souls is such a strange and even mystic game is because Miyazaki didn't really have the necessary experience and direction to fully create something like this. There were a lot of issues with how the game worked and felt, and he came onto this project because it was regarded as a business flaw by Sony. Miyazaki was kind of set up to make a failure, but he managed to make something work. He looked around at what options he had and used them to his advantage, transforming the project from a complete failure into an opportunity. An opportunity for Miyazaki to expand his reach in game development. But as you know, this isn't a video about Demon's Souls, and while Sony refused to help him make another game, Bandai Namco offered that necessary help, and with it, From Software would release Dark Souls in 2011, a game that would change the landscape forever, and one that is unfortunately still unfinished. So, going back to the beginning of Dark Souls, you do not know why you are here, you do not know what is going to happen, but none of that matters, as you just got your ticket out of the cell. This place is known as the Undead Asylum, a giant prison dedicated to those with the undead curse, those who have lost their mind and gone hollow, patrolled by these giant imposing demons making sure everything is in order. This area also acts as a tutorial level, teaching you the basics like attacking, running, dodging and stuff. I do believe that this tutorial missed out on one important mechanic, however, that being weight. Your weight controls how fast you can dodge, and with the player spawning with their armor on, that means that you are always going to be dodging at a pretty slow speed. Taking off some of your armor allows you to light roll, which is the roll speed you always want to aim for, but unfortunately the game never tells you this. There definitely should have been a small segment where you need to put on your armor, and it was always kind of weird to me how you spawn in your armor, but all of these hollows are naked. If you have a keen eye, you can spot the boss of this area, one of those patrolling demons, and realize the game wants you to be aware of your surroundings at all times. This boss can feel very intimidating and overwhelming at first. It can kill you in just 2 hits and you can barely deal any damage to compensate for that. Your priority here is not fighting the boss but running away into a small passageway that leads into the rest of the asylum. This is where you will have an experience with this ball that breaks a wall upon being activated, leading to the knight you saw at the beginning. It's a cool moment that shows how the environment changes and the ball does very little damage and cannot kill you. The knight's name is Oscar, and up to this point you didn't really know what you were doing, just running around this prison in hopes of escape. But Oscar is the one who gives you some sort of purpose. He tells you of a bell you must ring outside of this asylum. I always found it really interesting how Oscar threw the corpse into your cell, fully knowing that you may have gone hollow just like everyone else here, but held on to that hope that was not the case. Oscar will also give you the Estus Flask, the primary healing system in the game, and a key to the door leading outside. We will talk about Oscar more in depth later, but this is a great interaction with the character. After fighting through the asylum and grabbing the rest of your equipment, you cross a fog door onto a small balcony where you can plunge onto the asylum demon for a massive amount of damage. And seeing that number being so high can definitely help the player feel more powerful than they were when they first saw this monster. You have learned the arts of combat and you deal more damage. You're ready to face this thing and there is no going around it. The demon's attacks are slow and well telegraphed, and can be easily read and understood for a new player. You may have noticed that I also began this run with the black fire bombs. This is because you can actually use these fire bombs to kill the boss as soon as it drops down. They deal a great amount of damage and are a way you can skip this fight completely, and I find it pretty nice how a new player may find that and feel good about it on their first playthrough. Upon opening the gate, you can instantly feel how isolated this asylum is from the rest of the world. The people thrown here are meant to be forgotten about, with nobody ever coming to check up on them. I always like this atmosphere, it's great. There's also a really funny thing here, this message left by Oscar just saying, "Good job, go straight ahead." It feels so out of place and even childish, and I don't think it was really necessary to add, but it's funny nonetheless. Undead Asylum really succeeds as a tutorial area, and is in my opinion the best tutorial area FromSoft ever made. Upon walking to the edge of the cliff, a cutscene will play where a massive crow will pick you up and fly you to the hub area of your quest, Firelink Shrine. Dark Souls is in a lot of ways similar to Demon Souls. It's also a dark fantasy RPG adventure game that is also in a lot of ways inspired by Berserk. In fact, I believe that if you show a picture of these two games to someone who has never played either of them, they may very well say it's the exact same game. But what separates these two the most is how well Dark Souls innovated on the formula Demon Souls created, with the first half of Dark Souls being the best first half of any video game I've ever played. Firelink Shrine is a lot of people's favorite hub area FromSoft has ever made. And while there is one hub area that I slightly prefer, I can agree with this opinion thanks to the gameplay intricacy. Upon arriving, your first sight will be this massive bonfire in the middle. Bonfires act as checkpoints in the game, refilling your healing flask and respawning you there upon death. The player will also consider talking to the crestfallen warrior, who informs them of the fact that there are 2 bells of awakening the player must ring to proceed. One of the bells is located down below in the depths of Blighttown, while the other on top of Undead Burg. While walking around, you're instantly mesmerized by the music in this area. Dark Souls is a game where there is very little music, so this place having a soundtrack goes a long way. What everybody loves about Firelink is how interconnected it is with the rest of the game world, acting as a sort of crossroads between all of the main areas. If you decide to go down from the center, you can reach an elevator leading down to New Londo. If you head straight from the center, there's a graveyard filled with late game enemies that are not meant to be fought now. But nothing stops the player from fighting them and even progressing. Another thing that the game does really well is show you these out of bound areas you wish you could explore. There are so many times I wanted to access these out of bound areas. They're all fully modeled and detailed, even though no player is ever going to see these details. It's quite strange. The actual intended way to go is up this staircase that eventually leads to Undead Burg, filled with these undead soldiers that can be a bit tricky to handle on your first playthrough. It's kind of interesting how the developer decided to put this little rat in the sewer type pipe. He's just sort of there, extremely easy to kill and useless. But him being here makes the world really feel more detailed and more polished. Going up the stairs here finally leads us into Undead Burg, and I think this area is where a lot of the players will make a choice: continue playing the game or quit. I will take this opportunity to talk a lot more in depth about the gameplay systems, but I have to say that Dark Souls is a very unfriendly game to casual players. So unfriendly in fact that I actually quitted Undead Burg when I first played the Prepare to Die edition so many years ago because I've kept getting killed by these sword guys over and over, unable to progress. It's a game all about persistence, your determination to keep going despite all odds and finding ways to progress, giving you immense satisfaction for when you finally do conquer those challenges. And in that aspect, it is not for everyone. Dark Souls is technically a very slow game compared to its sequels. However, that may not be very apparent to a new player. When you are locked on, you can only roll in 4 different directions, and the enemies usually only attack once before giving an opening for your counterattack. In this sense, a lot of the combat will be about dispatching enemies quickly before they can overwhelm you in a lengthy battle, timing your attack before theirs to kill them in one hit or stun lock them for an easy kill. The time window after attacking and after drinking a healing flask are a lot different too. You can immediately roll away after an attack, but that is not the case with Estus flasks. This can trick some players who are just starting out and make them very frustrated. And while I never had much problems with how this worked, I can see why. The main way levels are meant to be tackled in this game is by going from bonfire to bonfire, refilling your flask in the process. This is a very simple level design on paper, but it works really well in Dark Souls most of the time because of its simplicity. You can also kindle these bonfires to give you more Estus flasks upon resting. I don't know how I feel about this feature, because to use it, you must be human. Humanity is another strange strange concept I'm not really a big fan of. It's a limited resource that you can obtain pretty much everywhere, but that is why I'm not very keen on using it. I don't enjoy limited resources that much in games, especially in a game like this where you are going to die a lot, making you fear the items are being wasted. These fog doors are used in a lot of areas in Dark Souls and can create some tension and fear on your first playthrough, not knowing what could be behind them. However, I don't really think they fit the area in a lot of ways. They don't really have an explanation behind their existence, and I'm glad they aren't part of the future games. The only real fog doors that make sense are the boss ones. Upon walking through this first fog door, you are met by this red drake landing on a rampart and quickly flying away. This is one of my favorite moments in the entire game. It creates this tense feeling that really strikes you the first time you see it. And I wish we saw more of these world events in the game and the series in general. Going through the first part of the area is always really interesting to me. There are so many instances of enemies hiding in corners and jumping out to attack you, with secret rooms and exploration possibilities. It also never really feels too hard for a new player to get through this area. Even those guys with swords are placed very carefully to allow you to learn the combat at your own pace. A little before the boss, there's this tower with an archer shooting at you from behind as you look at these two enemies. This is a cool teaser for what's to come. If you explore a bit more, you will notice this black knight standing in a tight hallway. This is a more late game enemy placed early on to encourage players to come back to areas they have already explored once they feel stronger. But if you're really good at the game like I am, this guy's a piece of cake. On my first actual playthrough, I ran my head against the wall fighting this guy. And once you beat him, there's a chance he can drop his weapon, the Black Knight sword, the weapon I got after killing him. This is my favorite weapon in the entire franchise because of how cool it looks and its very simple yet effective moveset. And the rest of the run in this video will be using it, but before that, we must talk about the first actual boss of the game, the Taurus Demon. I think the Taurus Demon is the most immersive boss in the entire game. Upon entering the fog door and walking forward, you will notice these archers shooting at you from above, similarly to that one archer just before the boss. Killing these guys doesn't mean much, but with the boss dropping down from the tower and running towards you, your objective here kind of becomes clear instantly. The Taurus Demon is far from the best boss in the game. Its attacks can be a little tricky and some of the hitboxes on them are really bad. However, fighting him the normal way is not the point of this battle. And while you can still do it this way, the actual better way to approach this encounter is to use plunging attacks from where you killed those archers, making the fight significantly easier. The Black Knight sword literally one-shots him here. It's a great moment. This is not where the methods of killing him end though, as you can actually make him fall off this little opening in the rampart meant for you to fall in. And I can imagine that the people who defeated this boss this way the first time probably felt like kings for realizing this. And lastly, if you want a more standard experience, you can make him jump on top of the tower for a larger arena. This is why I love this boss so much, and it's one of my favorite boss fights in the entire franchise, making me think about how immersive the game can really be, no matter how simple the fight is on the outside. Upon killing the boss and walking forward, you can reach this extremely gorgeous area with a view of the sun, with an NPC standing there taking in the atmosphere. This is Solaire, and while I do not want to go into NPC questlines of this game too much, as I do not think they're worth talking about to that point and would make this video's already insane length even longer, Solaire is an iconic character in the game. One of his dialogue lines says something that puzzles lore experts to this day, and I will take this opportunity to talk a bit more about the multiplayer aspect of the game as well. Miyazaki has stated multiple times that he loves these multiplayer add-ons he puts in the games, making the player feel like they're not alone when exploring these massive worlds. This is usually done through the use of phantoms occasionally running around and, more importantly, player messages, usually placed in front of hidden walls or funny moments. You can also hear the bell ringing in Undead Burg once another player rings it in their world. While this playthrough was done entirely offline, I appreciate these little design elements. They're quite original for a video game and I do not mind their inclusion. However, there are some problems that do eventually arise for both online and offline players, which I will talk about later. This is where you will reach this great bridge, and it's also where the dragon returns to breathe fire on it, killing you and everything else. This is not a very good moment. While it can be pretty easily avoided if you know it's coming, I never saw this coming on my first playthrough and I don't think many people did. Some people say that the way you can anticipate it is by seeing Ash on the bridge, which is just stupid. The real problem with this death is not dying itself, but the fact that you're going to be back at the last bonfire, which is very far away and that long run back is very obnoxious. Oh yeah, I should probably talk about the death system and how corpse runbacks work. In Dark Souls, you gain souls for every enemy you kill. You're meant to use them to either level up or buy items. Once you die, you will lose all of your souls. However, with the opportunity to reclaim them by making the trip to your corpse. This is a really simple yet effective system. It creates some tension that you may lose all of your currency and relieves you when you do reclaim it. The problem problem arises when the run back is either too long or too uneventful, such as this one, where it's both. You have to go through the Taurus Demon run back with the enemies you've been seeing over and over at this point, and then the arena, which is just empty. It's just too mundane. A quick solution to this problem would have been to have the dragon show up after the player has already unlocked the checkpoint. That way making this into more of a cool moment rather than a moment of annoyance. There are a lot of other terrible runbacks in this game, and while I really dislike most runbacks in games, it's important to keep in mind that Dark Souls is a very old game. This problem has been thankfully fixed in newer games, and for that I am very grateful, so I don't want to be too negative about it. If you avoid the dragon and go down this path, you will have your first holy shit moment, as you kick down a ladder to the bonfire in lower Undead Burg. This is the moment a lot of people come back to when they talk about the level design in this game, and for a good reason. There are two paths you can take from here, but they both lead to the same place. I am going to take the upper path, and doing this requires you to wait a pretty long time for the dragon to come down. The reason why I took this path is because I want to talk about another great and fun feature Dark Souls has to offer: tail cutting. You can pretty much cut off the tail from any boss or enemy that has one, usually giving you a special weapon in return. Doing this would also remove the tail from the boss's moveset, making the fight easier. It's sad that this feature was removed in the future games. There is some of it in Dark Souls 2, but most of it is useless and not worth doing. This path leads to the Undead Parish, another sub-area of Undead Burg. There is another interesting enemy introduced, which is this boar covered in armor, and another black knight on top of this tower. There are also these guys who can parry you, and parrying is basically timing your block perfectly as an enemy attacks, cancelling their attack and opening them for a critical hit. There are a few enemies capable of doing this, but they're usually not that dangerous. This path eventually leads to a more overgrown and closed off church. This is where you will hear what sounds like a hammer smashing an anvil, and you would be right. This church houses Andre the blacksmith, the primary way of upgrading your weapons and armor in the game, and an absolute chad. This path also leads to a closed off fortress, which we are going to come back to later. Andre was originally going to have a quest in a game where he was directly related to the final boss, and would move a statue in Firelink Shrine. While this would be pretty cool, I don't really think Andre needed much more than what we got, so it's not a big deal this was cut. Going down from Andre leads to this Titanite demon. This is one of the enemies I struggle with the most due to their really weird and broken hitboxes. I really don't like this enemy. We will come back to this path soon, but for now following the main path leads to another church that has a few new enemy types. The most mind-blowing thing about this place is this elevator, however, which leads back to Firelink Shrine. This is the best moment in the game for a lot of people, and I can see why. It's the absolute peak of interconnectivity in this game, and there is another moment like this a bit later. Breaking through a loose wooden wall reveals a prison cell, and this cell holds a friendly NPC. I just like to kill this guy to get his ring, which is useful throughout the whole game. Oh yeah, let me talk a bit about rings. Rings are a unique type of accessory in the game. There are 2 slots for them, and they usually give you specific buffs or even abilities. They are pretty cool. Climbing up this church finally leads us to the main boss of the area, the Bell Gargoyles. This boss is usually regarded as a DPS check because you're supposed to kill the first gargoyle before or as soon as the second one spawns. The Black Knight sword easily handles this, but any weapon that is decently upgraded will do the job. It's actually supposed to be an incentive to upgrade your weapon at Andre before tackling the boss, and I think it succeeds fairly well. The boss itself is pretty good, the attacks are decently telegraphed, and they're fairly balanced as a dual boss fight. I also like the introduction cutscene, not much else to say here. Upon killing the boss, you can finally ring that first bell of awakening. Doing so also spawns an NPC under you. This is a fairly important NPC a lot of players will have the need to use, so this place lacking a bonfire for the future is not a good design choice. To proceed further in our quest, we must take a little detour into the Darkroot Garden, the place where the stupid Titanite demon is. This place has one of the best atmospheres in the game. I always liked how entering here changes the time to night. It's beautiful, combined with the sound effects and the way it all feels alive and natural. The enemies here are more of the simpler side, but I don't think this place needed much variety to stand out. Following the main path leads to a locked door, but what I want to talk about here is this tiny little path on the left. Following this path awkwardly leads to a secret bonfire, and on my first playthrough I completely missed it, leading to problems with runbacks. I don't think this is a very big deal, at least not in this case. There are 2 less obvious hints that there is something behind this, and I believe that when I played I wasn't really observant of my surroundings, and I kind of like this concept of hiding checkpoints behind secrets that reward players for being observant. Going through a fog gate leads into this massive open area where we can see this weird snake thing in a tree. This is such a weird enemy that I'm not entirely sure why it's even a thing in the game, but little details like this is what makes the game what it is. You cannot find stuff like this in other FromSoft games. The area also has these massive mossy golems running around, which can be a bit tricky to handle. Going up these stairs at the end leads to another boss fight. In this case, a really bad boss fight. The Moonlight Butterfly. This boss is a gimmick fight. You are supposed to dodge projectiles, it throws at you very slowly until it comes down to rest, allowing you to hit it with melee attacks. The issue here is that melee builds are not going to handle this boss very well, especially because you don't really want to have a spell sticking around if you're a melee build. I always hope that I can one-cycle this boss because of how annoying it is to have to wait more after it flies up. Really, the only good thing this boss is going for it is the visuals and the music. There's also a small detail that is easily missable, which is that the boss actually flies down to rest and heal, giving an explanation as to why it actually does fly down, but you will never notice this as your goal is to keep hitting. Overall, it's far from a decent fight and I do not like it, but it's also far from the worst fight in the game. Its placement in the world also makes sense for the most part and I like it. Defeating the butterfly allows us to collect the key from this dead blacksmith on top of the tower, and it always makes me think, who was this guy? Why does he look like Andre? Using that key we can open this door on the Undead Burg bridge, leading us into a place I like to call the Undead Residences. This is a great area thematically. It's a place where actual people used to live compared to the ramparts you've been fighting through all this time, and it goes to show what is really happening here with the corpses being burned in the fire. It does have a few annoying problems like these dog enemies that are honestly really bad, but are not that hard to kill. A great twist this area offers are these bandits who rush out of the house to attack you. They are another enemy who can parry you and are quite dangerous. However, if you know they are coming, you can hit them through the door for an easy kill. They are cool enemies. I love how they backstep to dodge your attacks. What is not cool, however, is this upcoming boss, the Capra Demon. This is by many people regarded as the worst boss in the game, due to two little factors that make it a terrible fight. The Capra Demon itself is not really a bad enemy. He has well telegraphed attacks and a better hitbox than the Taurus Demon. The actual problems here are the arena, which is extremely small and glitches the camera all the time due to these trees that don't belong here, and a much worse problem are these two dogs that are placed in the boss arena as ads. As soon as I entered the boss room, I was stun locked by a dog into a Capra Slam, killing me instantly. There really isn't any good consistent way to avoid this problem. You can only pray that the dogs do not attack you immediately, giving you an opening to run past the demon and kill them on the stairs, making the fight a one-on-one. And even then the arena may still cause you problems. I was able to kill the Capra on my second attempt, but the long run back here really doesn't make it fun. I know that this boss fight has been talked about too many times, but what isn't really discussed is these dogs. They actually respawn once you kill the boss in return, and this means that they were originally placed here either before or after the boss was already made. Whoever made the decision to put these two in the same room should have really tested it more. But there is some little charm in this boss fight. I don't know how to explain it well. I don't specifically dread it when I replay the game. In fact, I find it a bit funny that it got in the game in the first place. It feels like a bit of a troll, who knows man. The Capra drops the key to the depths, which will be the next area we tackle. However, not before opening another shortcut back to Firelink Shrine. This is the one I kind of forget about when I play the game, but it's just another example of genius level design. If you go to the pond in Firelink, you can hear something sleeping below the water, and a teaser for what's to come. One of the things I love about Dark Souls is just how much detail it was put into making the world make sense. The next area we are going to look at, which is the depths, is a sewer system directly below Undead Burg. This dank and claustrophobic place is home to many terrible creatures, such as the rats, slimes, more hollows, and of course these cursed basilisks. God, that's hard to say, I'm just gonna call them lizards. What I really like about the depths is how the atmosphere instantly shifts once you open the door and you're hit by this oppressing and dark place. Something is wrong here. These butchers are a unique enemy that only appear in this single room, and I think their inclusion is really interesting. This room also houses the most important NPC in the entire franchise, or well, the most well known. But even that is debatable, it's just a voice line. This Pyromancer guy is the NPC with the most iconic voice line in the game, and I think he's really the only one I go out of my way to save when I play the game. Dropping down this path, you can plunge onto the giant rat guarding the area, and this is pretty fun. This leads us into the actual sewers, which are a maze-like tunnels that are hard to navigate, filled with this strange goo all around the place. A lot of the rats in this place will run away from the player, basically baiting them to fall into holes. And after falling, you're met with the lizards I spoke about earlier. Lizards are a strange enemy. On one hand, I really like their design and the placement in the world is great, but on the other, they possibly have the most frustrating mechanic in the entire game. Lizards do not attack the player traditionally, instead they breathe out this gas that builds up the cursed status effect. The goal here is to avoid it by running around them and attacking them before they can do it again. But new players will not know that, and this status effect will definitely get them. Once you get cursed in Dark Souls, you immediately die. But that's not the problem here. The curse effect actually has a post-death penalty, halving your health bar until you either go to this NPC or use a stone. This really screws up a lot of new players, and when the game came out, many people restarted or even quit the game because they couldn't figure out how to get rid of the curse. It's a terrible status effect, and I don't really need to go more in depth as to why. Thankfully, there are not a lot of lizards in this area, but they still pose a massive issue in the early stage of the game. You can find the Ring of the Evil Eye here, which is really useful for exploration as it gives you HP upon killing an enemy. Getting out of the maze-like structure of the depths leads us into a bigger room with a master locked door. This is where you will also meet this guy who sells boss armor sets and stuff after defeating bosses. Overall, the depths is a great contrast compared to Undead Burg. It's a completely different layout, and the enemy types work really well to populate the game world with unique scenarios, and that is especially clear to you when you reach this massive room that holds the boss. The Gaping Dragon is designed and role placement wise one of the best bosses in the series. I love the way it climbs out of this mysterious pit and just how uncanny it is compared to the rest of the world. The reason why will become clear quite soon, but for now I want to focus on the boss itself. The dragon is an interesting boss fight compared to all of the others fought so far. It is a massive foe, and it makes you aware of that instantly, as this charge attack can cover a third of the arena. It's a boss fight that values patience more than aggression, and that's pretty good considering this is supposed to be a massive foe that is far beyond your league. The boss also loves to transition between these two phases, one where its head is on the ground and one where it opens a massive gaping mouth that has consumed the stomach. It also introduces a new mechanic we have not seen so far, grab attacks. These are special attacks which stun lock you into a specific animation, dealing consistent damage and being much more deadly than regular attacks. They're hit and miss most of the time due to awkward hitboxes, but this specific grab attack is one I really like. I love how the boss puts you in its massive mouth and begins to devour you relentlessly. Overall, the Gaping Dragon is quite a good boss. There are some weird things about it that make it awkward for new players, but I think it's the first boss that really emphasizes the philosophy of these games. Killing it for the first time can feel very empowering. This small loser cast away from the world and deemed useless had slain something so massive and frightening. You, the player, had done it. I do think the boss is a bit easy to exploit when you know what you're doing, but that's not a big deal. I never really understood why the dragon drops the key to Blighttown upon killing it. This is a weird thing in Dark Souls that doesn't make much sense. The lore of the key states that the dragon devoured it, but this would mean the player character would have to search around the massive corpse of the boss just for this one item, completely disregarding everything else the dragon devoured. A much better way to have the player obtain the key is just to lock a room behind the boss room where the player can pick it up from a corpse or get it from a chest. This is a nitpick, and I understand that many don't care about it, but I feel like this would have been better than to just have the dragon devour it. Opening the door to Blighttown immediately shifts the whole atmosphere in the game. Locked up by those living in the depths themselves, it is directly under it and houses the most vile and mutated creatures in the world. Creatures that feed off of the waste not even the depths can handle. It is truly the rock bottom of the world. The Gaping Dragon also comes from here. It has mutated so much to the point of being completely unrecognizable from these monsters. A mighty dragon fell to corruption, hiding from the dragon slayers. Nobody is truly safe from Blighttown, and you opening that door is a consequence that doesn't really become clear to you instantly. But knowing that even the people from the depths, a dank and dirty place, fear Blighttown is enough to cause shivers. Blighttown is a very vertical level. It's probably the only real level in the whole game which uses this much verticality in its design, minus one side area, but that is what makes it original and great. The whole area consists of these tall wooden towers and platforms created by the local community to the point of where they shift and turn, making you have to pay attention to how you're walking forward to avoid falling. The first enemy you will fight in Blighttown is this huge big barbarian guy, and he literally drops poop. It goes to show to what land the outcasts here went to. Great world building. Another enemy are these small mutated humanoids who usually ambush you in pairs and can even hide in barrels. The last normal enemy are these flaming dogs. I don't really like them that much, but they're better than the regular dogs. When the game initially came out, Blighttown used to be one of the most hated areas. This was mainly because of how laggy it was. There were just too many assets being loaded on the screen for the platforms to handle, and with bad optimization, it caused massive issues for people playing the game. This was fortunately fixed as time went on, but this area still remains hated by a good amount of people to this day. Mostly due to two aspects. We're not going to talk about the second one yet, but the first one is these blow dart guys who shoot darts which can inflict toxic on you in just 2 hits. Toxic is a really powerful status effect similar to poison, except it's much stronger and harder to get rid of. And these guys spamming their blow darts every second is truly not a good way to balance that out. I never had a problem with it myself because these guys permanently die after after just killing them once. But I can see why this can cause a lot of frustration for players. As you descend deeper and deeper into this horrid place, you will eventually set your eyes on this massive parasitic-like spider thing that is blocking a path. This thing always kind of fascinated me. It's the only instance of a thing like this being in the game, and the game files refer to it as Prince Izalith. Lore people will know where this goes. This is a completely unique enemy that doesn't even have a real AI. It's so strange, but it really fits the placement, and if you find a way behind it, you can notice that it's actually feeding off of this sewage pipe. The weird thing about this creature is that its hitbox is very strange. Hitting it is very difficult for some reason, and I can only kill it with a heavy attack. It's not the best, but that's not really the point. Descending further into Blighttown reveals that we're actually getting closer to a massive swamp at the bottom, with these disgusting flaming monstrosities attacking us. These are actually humans, you can see the head. Another really annoying enemy that appears here is the mosquitoes. These guys are really funny and stupid. They deal minimal damage and always die in one hit, but their hitbox makes it extremely difficult to hit them, which isn't really well thought out. They also follow you throughout the whole map, just a little fun enemy that I honestly like for how dumb it is. This finally leads us into the second reason people dislike Blighttown, is this massive poison swamp at the bottom which slows down your movement and builds up poison very fast. The swamp is widely regarded as one last screw you to the player from the developers, and while I think this is somewhat accurate, I think I actually really like this swamp. It's the second poison swamp in the series and the one I believe kickstarted the trend of swamps in FromSoft's future games. They restrict your traditional movement and force you to think outside of the box on how to get through them. It really fits the area too, having a massive pond of sewage that created a swamp where the insect-like monstrosities breed is just good world building. The bonfire is also easily accessible and offers a sort of century point for exploration. The intended way to progress is through the swamp to this webbed-like mound of Blighttown that leads to the next boss. The setup to this boss is amazing. The way the web has overtaken these wooden spikes rising out of the ground and having the player enter the spider's den is really interesting. These chanting guys don't really make much sense at first, but an actual teaser for something a bit later, finally leading us into the next main boss of the game, Quelaag. Quelaag is, in my opinion, the best boss in the game so far. She has a great design with her lore being equally as enticing, and I think the fight itself is a great teacher on how bosses should actually be approached in these games. Quelaag's attacks are telegraphed exceptionally well, where she has multiple unique animations of interacting with her lower half, indicating a different attack is about to come. The boss has one key aspect it is trying to show the player, that you should always stay close to the foe you are fighting. Quelaag has these sword attacks that can be extremely tricky to dodge if you do not get the timing right, but staying right in front of her or just beside her makes her completely unable to hit you, and the only thing to worry about is the lower half. I really hope this was an intentional move by the developers and not a development oversight, because it's one case where the game really shines in eureka moments by the player if you figure it out. It makes sense that Quelaag is not able to hit you here because she is not able to aim down much due to her lower half. Defeating Quelaag opens up a path to the second Bell of Awakening, and upon rigging it, it plays a cutscene with that massive door opening near Andre's church. That is our next destination, but for now I want to take the time to talk a bit about two things. First of all, killing Quelaag also opens up a path to the Demon Ruins, a very late game area that we will get to eventually. You do not want to be down here for long. The second thing is this hidden wall in her domain. Remember when I said that not playing online can make the game feel a bit worse? Well, here is one example of that. This wall is illusionary, but that can be pretty tough to spot for an offline player, especially if this is the first illusionary wall they come across. This aspect of the game is completely trivialized for online players, since they will be able to spot secrets immediately due to the player message system. I have to say that this is not criticism or anything like that. There are two different ways to play the game, and that's fine. I don't have any issue with this, but I can see how it can feel a bit cheap to people who do play offline to miss content, and how that magic of finding secrets can feel lost to players who play online. I don't think it's a big deal though, but there will be another example of this later that actually does have problems. Miyazaki has stated multiple times that multiplayer is a huge part of these games, and I think it can really shine in specific scenarios. Finding this secret path leads us into a room with Quelaag's sister, and this is where I will talk a bit about covenants. Covenants are allegiances the player can join in the Dark Souls world. They offer unique rewards and bonus gameplay elements if the player levels up that specific covenant. For example, this door can open up if you level up the spider covenant enough. This feature makes the world feel more alive rather than everything revolving around you, which you know it already isn't. But this is just a step further in that, and it's a great gameplay element. There can be some issues with these covenants when it comes to online play and such, but that is kind of trivial. Overall, it's quite a cool feature that acts as a little bonus to gameplay and storytelling that is entirely optional. Before continuing onward, the player must escape Blighttown, thus beginning one of the best sections of the game in my opinion. Some people tend to dislike that Dark Souls does not have a fast travel system until around around half point of the game. However, if it did have it, we would not have sections like these. Escaping Blighttown using the small elevator and fighting your way through is one of the best moments I've had playing this game. It's like a massive journey home after completing your task in a hellhole of a location. This is where you will climb out into the Valley of Drakes, an area that acts sort of like a spine to the whole world, being directly below Firelink Shrine and connecting to multiple locations. I don't really explore it in this playthrough, nor do I see the need to, because it's mainly just connecting every location in a nice way. This leads into what I think is the last big surprise you will have with Dark Souls. Opening this tower leads to an elevator which goes all the way up to Firelink Shrine. This is my personal favorite surprise in the game, and I know I'm not the only one. Heading back to the water pond now reveals that the bells ringing had awoken a massive primordial serpent, and this guy basically exists to guide you forward. He tells you that you are the chosen one meant to link the fire and succeed Gwyn, the man who started it all, eradicating the undead curse and saving the world. It finally feels like you've been given more context and an idea of what is actually going on in this world and your purpose in it. Of course, some of this can feel uncanny and weird, and that will become apparent later on, but for now the next destination is Sense Fortress. However, before doing that, you can find this secret path in Firelink Shrine that leads up to the Crow Nest, which you can curl up in. Doing this for a few moments will play a cutscene and you will be led back into the Undead Asylum. Usually video games avoid backtracking in the game world to prevent the player from being bored, mostly because they don't know how to repurpose old areas or have a fear that they may not have the same impact as seeing them for the first time. Not in Dark Souls, however, as revisiting the Undead Asylum feels like you would come across the secret area you were meant to find easily, and with how the layout of it changes, it creates an extremely memorable experience. The reason why I'm bringing up the revisit now is because I believe this is around the time you are meant to find it, but it is actually accessible from the moment you're brought to Firelink in the first place, and by that point you're severely underleveled. I kind of like that you're able to come back here from the moment you enter the game world, but at the same time it has some gameplay inconsistencies that don't really make much sense if you're playing the game for the first time. So while finding this secret can feel great, I imagine it must be quite confusing for a new player who just happened to come across this secret as soon as they enter Firelink, but that's extremely rare. Undead Asylum is very similar to what it originally was, however hosting a few harder enemies, but that's enough to make it stand out in the game world. I also really like how this stupid message I mentioned at the beginning of the video could be interpreted in the complete opposite way it initially seemed. Revisiting this place makes you go backwards in the level, so this message could be taken in that context, telling you to go straight back into the asylum. God, what a funny message. This is where something interesting will happen. As you walk forward, the floor under you will break and you will fall into this massive room with another asylum demon, this one being known as a stray demon. I think this moment can feel pretty cheap to a lot of players because you are extremely surprised and take quite a bit of fall damage upon dropping, but I honestly like it. The surprise element is what makes this encounter cool. Reusing an old boss like this actually makes a lot of sense. We have seen this specific demon before roaming around, and the fight itself really shows how far you've come, being able to tackle this enemy again to show your growth. I also want to mention the arena. It's one of the more unique ones in the game, and while it doesn't serve any purpose in the fight itself, I think it's very fitting for this encounter. The boss also has a bit of a different moveset compared to the first demon, and honestly, I don't really like this moveset. Some of the attacks never really made sense to me, and the hitboxes are all over the place. The boss can also easily get stuck in a loop where he will spam this one attack over and over, making it extremely easy to exploit its AI and defeat it without much effort. I like this encounter, but it's far from the best in the game, and unfortunately, this will not be the last we'll see of the Asylum demon. Upon defeating the boss, you can climb this ladder to reach your old cell, where a Black Knight has moved to guard it. Upon defeating him, you can find a strange doll and a new corpse. It's kind of a bizarre moment. I always like to question how this corpse made its way here and why. It's like someone dropped it in a cell for you, not knowing you have already left. It's little things like these that make me really intrigued in a game world. The last thing I will talk about in the Undead Asylum is Oscar, who at the time of the revisit went completely hollow, and the best thing to do is put him out of his misery. Oscar was originally going to be a rival character to the player throughout the whole game. He was supposed to compete with you as to who will get to link the flame first, but unfortunately, due to development running out of funding and other reasons, this was never implemented. I think something like this would have worked really well for multiple reasons, and the emotional impact of that final encounter with Oscar before going to the Guild would have been much grander. I'm honestly really sad that this had to be cut from the game, and while Oscar going hollow goes to show what in dire state this world is in, I would have much rather preferred a more convoluted story for him, considering he's a character in all of the covers and one of the most well-known characters in the Dark Souls universe. With the Undead Asylum out of the way for good, it's finally time to take a trip into Sense Fortress. And right from the introduction, this area shows what it's going to be about, with arrows shooting at you if you step on this pressure plate. I think the level design of Sense is really interesting. It's the only level in the game which utilizes actual obstacles you have to watch out for when exploring, whether that be traps you step onto, massive axes swinging that you have to time to avoid, or these giant boulders that can crush you instantly. In that sense, Sense is most likely the most unique level in the game, but for that reason, it does have its fair share of small issues I will talk about soon. Sense introduces two new enemies, the snake soldier guy and a lightning shooting snake humanoid. I always liked how the traps you set off also affect the enemies that are caught up in it, like the arrows being able to hit these enemies. One of the things I don't see often talked about in these games is that while you yourself are not able to hit through walls and your character can bounce off easily, that does not count for the enemies in these games, and it creates this annoying sense of unfairness that the laws of gameplay do not bind them while they bind you. I always found this really annoying, and while it's not a massive issue, it's definitely something that breaks the immersion I feel in these games. But a moment like this can help with that. The main gripes I have with Sense is that these boulders can stun lock you into a repetition of being crushed, basically killing you. But the worst part, however, is definitely the Mimic. Don't get me wrong, I actually really like the Mimic enemy. It's a great subversion of expectations, especially the first time you encounter one. But this one in particular has not been thought out very well in my opinion. When playing offline, there are almost no signs that this chest is a Mimic, and I wouldn't have a problem with this Mimic killing the player as long as a bonfire was nearby or a checkpoint or something. But unfortunately, this is a later section of the fortress that is still not near the bonfire, and it bringing you back to the beginning is extremely cheap and frustrating. This problem is completely trivialized if you play online, which can either give you relief or completely destroy this moment of surprise. It's one case of a problem that doesn't really have much of a solution, but putting a bonfire or a shortcut or even moving the Mimic further into the level after you obtain the bonfire could have been a decent way to fix a part of it. This is the last time I will speak about offline and online elements of the game, because most of the differences at this point become clear and they're not a big deal like this Mimic situation. I think making your way outside of Sense Fortress and onto the ramparts is a really cool moment. There is some enemy reuse here with the parry guys, but I think they fit this place considering they're pretty close to Andre's church and Undead Burg either way. The giants here also throw massive flaming pots at you too, which is another interesting way to shake up the last part of the fortress. These giants are chained to the fortress itself, implying that they were enslaved and used by these people for nefarious purposes. The name of this place also really makes me think, who was Sen? Why is this his fortress in the first place? I don't know, Dark Souls is cool. Oh, by the way, there's a theory that it was actually the Nameless King and I really like it. Making our way to the fog door here leads us into the boss of the level, the Iron Golem, which is another one of my favorite bosses in the game. The Iron Golem is interesting because it has this unique gimmick of a giant throwing pots at you from tower, which has to be killed before entering the boss room. The boss itself is fun, it has this unique range attack that will always start the battle with, and you can use the arena to your advantage to block it. This is actually the first boss where the arena deliberately plays a part in how you engage with it. The boss can easily knock you off of the rampart if you're not careful, and you must be wary of that. The point of this fight is to use its massive size to your advantage, running around its legs and sneaking a hit in when possible. This boss also has a grab attack, and this one I'm a less fan of because it makes no sense to me as to why he would throw you back to the rampart if the whole point for you is to fall off of it. Eventually, as you hit the boss more, he will begin to wobble around like he's about to fall, and while this animation lasts an uncanny amount of time, it's still really funny. The purpose here is to make him fall down, which you can do so by hitting him repeatedly in this state. Unfortunately, I was not able to get footage of it, but you can actually make the boss fall off the rampart yourself, and I think it's the most satisfying way of defeating him and the one I got on my first playthrough. This boss is also an opportunity to talk a bit about NPC summons in Dark Souls. Summoning an NPC for a boss fight is basically a way to make that fight easier, as the boss will become a 2-on-1 in most cases. I am kind of a fan of this feature. It allows people who are just unable to learn the boss or don't have the time to do so some fun and immersion when fighting the boss. And the lore implications are pretty nice too. All of you are technically undead who are trying to link the flame. The summon here is the mighty Black Iron Tarkus, who has many great lore implications and is just cool. This is a great boss fight in almost every aspect, and it's a boss that made me appreciate just how many ways you can defeat it. The Taurus Demon and the Iron Golem are bosses that made me think about the fact that Dark Souls could technically be classified as an immersive sim, and for that I have a lot of praise about these two fights. Defeating the boss spawns this strange ring of light in the center of the arena, and interacting with it plays a cutscene where demons snatch you from the fortress and carry you to the divine land of Anor Londo. Throughout the whole game, Anor Londo has been building up in the back of your mind. You can see it from far away, and many NPCs mention it in the dialogue as this magnificent city of the gods. So this introduction to it is magnificent in its own right. The way this ring of light appears after defeating the Iron Golem and how the demons carry you to the city can seem weird at first and kinda hard to wrap your head around. There was actually going to be another level in between the fortress and Anor Londo, which unfortunately had to be cut from development. But I don't really mind this. Everything in your journey up to this point has been a test of persistence and skill. Pretty much every major area is a test for those who wish to get to Anor Londo, with the Iron Golem being the final challenge. So I like to think of this moment as something really grand and more unique than anything else in the game, and it really is. Anor Londo is a massive, shining city where the gods live. It is completely disconnected from the rest of the Dark Souls world, but I think that is what it gives it more impact as a location. It is also the halfway point of the game, and the game goes through a drastic change after it, but more on that later. This area does have its fair share of issues. In fact, I think the most out of any area been meant to so far, but that does not mean it's a bad level. The first new enemy the player will encounter is this massive Iron Knight, who attacks extremely slowly and feels really uncanny. These guys don't really have an AI you would expect from enemies you've seen so far in the game. Their field of vision is much lesser, and they don't attack you unless you get really close. It's easy to trick these two and fight them one-on-one. All of this will make you feel really strange, like something is wrong here. The way forward is taking down this elevator, which reintroduces an old enemy, the Bell Gargoyle. I always think that this is a great way to show the player how far they've come, as this boss is now nothing more than a mere enemy, which you can defeat without much struggle. Going forward is not possible, so your next move may be a bit confusing. You see, you're meant to take the path to the left, jumping on this roof to reach a broken window. Some people say that this is quite bad. The player has never done something like this before, so taking this path may feel a bit unorthodox. I never had much issue with it myself, but I think an easy solution to this problem would have been to place a small prism stone on the roof, letting the players know that they can walk on it, especially because someone specifically went this way and broke the window for you. That someone implied to be Tarkus. Going through the broken window leads us into this intricate balcony where precise movement is key, all the while you have to deal with enemies who specialize in both range and melee attacks. I really like this segment. It's always fun to do, and I think it goes a long way in making Anor Londo feel like this ultimate challenge the game has been building up since the beginning, and getting past it can feel pretty empowering. Doing so actually takes you to the contraption you were enabled to enter before the rooftop segment, which is a giant elevator thing that you have the freedom of controlling the elevation of. It also acts as a checkpoint at the same time, because it connects these two bridges. It's great. The main door of Anor Londo is locked, and to get in we must take another path. This is where we are introduced to another brand new enemy, these demons that brought you to the city in the first place. The Batwing demons are a massive double-edged sword, and I think that they're my least favorite enemy in the entire game. I love their design, but I despise their moveset. Every single attack they can do stun lock you and even knock you down. When fighting these guys in groups, they're the hardest thing to deal with, and unfortunately fighting them in groups will be inevitable. A really dumb thing about them is how they can also fall off the map despite having wings and being shown to know how to fly. I don't know why this happens, but it's stupid and hilarious. However, it breaks the impression the enemy gives. Back when Dark Souls first came out, this upcoming section with the archers was the most despised area of the game, but I think as time went on, people started to kind of meme about it and develop strategies to deal with it. I still think it's a really stupid section, but I actually have more problems with these two Batwing demons waiting for you before this section even begins. I died to these guys so many times because while you're fighting them, there's an archer shooting at you, and the only way to avoid this consistently is to fight between these two pillars. But then the demons have a much easier time hitting you, and you will have a much harder time hitting them due to the backsteps. It's horrible, and I think it's one of my least favorite parts of the game. The archer section itself is annoying, but I don't think it's as bad as people used to say it was. Maybe a long time has passed and I've just gotten better at the game, but I don't remember struggling with this specifically even on my first playthrough. It was always just the demons before it. However, it is still an annoying area to go through. Getting through this path allows us to enter the castle through a balcony. I always feel like I am breaching this magnificent and flawless castle through a hidden path that nobody expects me to, and I think this feeling is what the developers intended for the player to have. The inner section of Anor Londo is obviously far more claustrophobic in terms of layout. A lot of the enemies here are simple silver knights who you will be fighting in luxuriously decorated rooms that show us a lot about how these people used to live. There's also this hidden basement you can find, and at this point, hitting every single chest you see will be drilled into your brain, which can allow you to easily dispatch the mimics. There is also this room in Anor Londo you will come across as you explore. This room is filled to the brim with dragon heads as trophies. I always found this room so much more mysterious than all of the other rooms, and I think the general idea here is that these are all the dragons Gwyn and the gods hunted before they exterminated them. But I like to think it's actually a teaser for the upcoming boss battle, showing just how legendary the foe you're going to be facing is. After entering the main hall, you can take the small path which leads to another blacksmith, a trapped giant forced to work in his remaining years. I really like this guy, he seems to like his job. Just like I love doing this voiceover. God damn it. This is usually where I take this opportunity to use up all of my soul items and max out my weapon for this upcoming boss battle. Dragon Slayer Ornstein and Executioner Smoke are most likely the most iconic fight in all of Dark Souls. They are the boss that sparks the most discussions and in my opinion the best fight in the base game. For me, they're also the most difficult fight in the whole game. I've died to these guys more times than any other boss including the DLC, and for a good reason. These days, FromSoft has kind of a bad reputation regarding gang fights, but I think this is all because of Ornstein and Smoke. This fight has set the bar so high since the beginning to the point where surpassing it with another duo fight can seem impossible, and I think From knows this to some extent. Before talking about the boss itself, I think I owe these guys some praise on their backgrounds. Ornstein is a legendary hero who also serves as the captain of the 4 Knights of Gwyn. He's a legendary dragon slayer who slew countless dragons alongside him, which is why I love that room before the boss so much. Smoke on the other hand is an executioner belonging to the royal family of Anor Londo, who dreamed of becoming a knight himself but was driven mad by his job, consuming the flesh of those he had killed. The duo is so different from each other, yet their attacks flow seamlessly in combat, with Ornstein being small and nimble and Smoke massive and slow. This fight also probably has the most immersive arena in the game, as you're meant to use these pillars to maneuver around Ornstein's projectiles and Smoke slams, making you feel like a master once you learn how to stay safe. Up to this point, I have never really talked about the music of Dark Souls. That's mainly because the game is in the majority of its game time silent without much but ambient noises of your footsteps. This is of course not the case in boss fights, but I think this boss has the first soundtrack that really feels like it belongs in the fight and works really well. It has these heroic elements that are consistently challenged by a dark undertone, further indicating the duo's conflicting ideologies and backgrounds. It is my favorite boss soundtrack in the whole game and I can't praise it enough. However, this fight does have some minor problems. Sometimes it can be really hard to see which attack is coming your way from which direction. This is a problem in duo fights in general and is not related to just ONS, but it's worth mentioning. It can also feel a bit cheap when both bosses overlap their attacks in just the right rhythm to mess you up, but that's extremely rare. Overall, the boss feels like a dance that is worth learning the tempo of, and dancing with the two makes you feel like a champion. This fight has 2 outcomes. If you decide to kill Ornstein first, Smoke will crush him and absorb his power, making the fight at one-on-one and extremely easy. However, if you decide to kill Smoke first, which is what I always do, Ornstein will gently take Smoke's power and become much bigger and stronger, with the fight itself becoming an even bigger endurance test than before. I really like how even in the fight itself, you can see these characters' conflicting personalities. And while I personally prefer fighting Ornstein as the main boss, I appreciate that From decided to deliberately keep Smoke on the easier side for struggling players due to this boss already being so hard. At least I hope they intended it. The only thing I don't like about this boss is the runback. Fuck that. Defeating ONS opens up the rest of the room, with you being able to take either of these elevators, which is a neat detail that gives even more personalities to these legendary bosses. Waiting for you at the top is Guinevere, the Queen of Sunlight, and the one who congratulates you, giving you the Lord Vessel and telling you that you are meant to succeed Gwyn and stop the Undead curse. This moment can feel very empowering to the player after defeating ONS, especially with the grand music playing in the background. However, there is just one small issue here. Just like everything else in Anor Londo, this is uncanny. Something here is wrong. This is Dark Souls. Killing Guinevere reveals that she's actually an illusion created by Gwyn's son, Gwendolyn, to sustain the divine image of Anor Londo, and soon the whole city reveals its true colors, showing a dark and twisted truth. There are no gods in Anor Londo. Those stories of this magnificent divine city are not true anymore. This is a dead city with nobody in it. I think this revelation is kind of meant to represent the fact that your journey is far from over, and you cannot find peace yet. It finally makes sense why those enemies act the way they do, and why everything here feels wrong. Everything was just an elaborate illusion set up to manipulate the player into prolonging the Age of Fire, and now it's time to break that illusion for good. The first thing you will see when leaving the main hall are these hostile NPCs, who are Gwendolyn's personal guardians. I haven't talked about it yet, but a pretty big aspect of Dark Souls combat is actually AI NPC battles. If I'm being completely honest, I'm not the biggest fan of them in general in any of From's games, but I also don't mind their inclusion, especially because they can add some variety in combat. I think it was always meant to represent the multiplayer aspect of the game more, and I don't know how I feel about about that, but I think the majority of the placements are not bad. Upon using the elevator again, you may notice that there is actually a hidden turn you can do, which will bring the elevator down to the last drop, where Gwendolyn's secret boss room lies. Before we fight the boss, I actually want to talk a bit about this bonfire before the boss itself. This bonfire is either bugged or deliberately broken by the developers. No matter if you're rested at it, when you die you will always be transported to a now extinguished bonfire that marks the beginning of Anor Londo, making this run back extremely long and uneventful. Some people say that this is a deliberate choice by the developers, meant to represent some sort of punishment given by Gwendolyn for killing Guinevere, but I think this is just terrible game design. The reason why this happens is because of you killing the firekeeper who is hostile to you before the elevator. I don't understand how the player is meant to know that you should not kill this NPC before you're done with your business in Anor Londo. The NPC literally attacks you on sight and there are absolutely no signs of pointing this out. And the game has set the fact straight that resting at any bonfire, no matter which one it is, will set your spawn point to that bonfire. I think one of the biggest sins a game can commit is making the player bored and annoyed. And this is exactly what this quote-unquote feature does. I cannot believe it is still in the game, even in the remastered version. What a horrible feature. The fight with Gwendolyn is not that good either. I don't think it's a terrible fight, but I also don't think it's anything remotely close to any of the good bosses we have discussed. Gwendolyn is a character that actually has some of the best lore this series has to offer and a great design. And I find it kind of underwhelming how this fight is not even near that quality. To give praise where it is due, the arena of this fight is amazing and mesmerizing. And the song in the background fits the battle too, even if it's a reuse of the Moonlight Butterfly theme. The whole gimmick here is that Gwendolyn will spam magic attacks at you and fire arrows from a distance, forcing you to chase him in an infinite corridor, getting a few hits in as he teleports away. This is kind of a snail fest and that's why I don't like it. I do enjoy how the arena is a lot more utilized as you're meant to hide behind these pillars to avoid most of his attacks. But other than that, the fight has nothing going for it. I also think this boss looks and even functions a lot better if you fight him during Anor Londo's illusion phase, because the corridor looks a lot nicer and the attacks are more visible. However, I don't really like doing that. It's not a boss that completely fails this fight, but it's also a weaker one in the game. Still better than the Moonlight Butterfly though. Before heading out of Anor Londo and using the Lord Vessel, we're going to take a trip into this massive room containing a painting. This is the entrance to a completely optional area in the base game, and before we talk about it, I must talk about these painting guardians. I always question the placement of these guys. They feel like they have been spammed throughout the whole room without much thought, and I don't really understand why. This is where we can finally put that doll to good use and enter the painting, taking us to the painted world of Ariamis. I think the painted world of Ariamis is the last good level in terms of quality Dark Souls has to offer, and after this point, the game goes on a descending roller coaster. That is kind of strange considering that this is a completely optional level, which is going to be most likely skipped by the majority of first time players due to how hard it can be to get here. So putting this much effort into it can feel strange, but I think it was the right decision to make. There is a massive amount of respect I can give to From for deciding to do something like this, especially on their extremely tight budget and time constraints this game has been worked on. Finding the way to enter the painting on your own is a great moment for anyone who managed to do it, and seeing a fully fleshed out level behind that secret is even better. If there is a word I can use to describe the painted world, it's just comfort. After the challenges of Sen's Death Trap and the magnificence or lack thereof regarding Anor Londo, I think this level sort of acts as a break from all of that and allows you to recharge your battery for the second half of the game. Before continuing to talk about it, I want to discuss the last gameplay element before the second half, and that is how the story and lore is handled in this game. When you're playing Dark Souls the first time, there's a very high chance you will not understand mostly anything about what is going on. This is because a lot of the story and lore is deliberately obscured by the developers, hidden in environmental storytelling and item descriptions. For example, if you pay attention, you will notice that the majority of enemies in the painted world are hollows and creatures who just look weird and don't belong in the main world. This is explained further if you decide to read the descriptions of some of the items found here and piece together the story of this place, it being a safe haven for those exiled from the real world. This is, in my opinion, a very respectable choice by FromSoft that rewards players who decide to dig deeper in the game world and find answers on their own, and doesn't annoy the players who don't care about the story. It does have a few issues, and sometimes the lore can be extremely difficult to understand and even left up to interpretation, but those problems are just consequences of creating a system like this, and they don't really matter for an average player. The painted world is a level that focuses on ambushing ambushes and surprises way more than any other level we've been to so far. And I think that is what separates it and gives it its own identity fairly well. These items placed down here are sort of like bait for the player to come closer, before hollows ambush you by climbing over the walls. You can easily get overwhelmed, but soon enough you'll learn to expect these ambushes and master the area. There are also these cool crow guys who will sometimes fly near you. I don't have much to say about them, but I like their inclusion and design. The only real bad enemy in this level are these hollows with massive parasites on their heads. The gimmick behind these guys is that once you kill them, they will almost immediately inflict you with toxic. I could never get the timing down in how this works, and I think in general this is quite a frustrating enemy, but thankfully there are not a lot of them. Another really cool detail I want to point out is how you can find rats in this house, and you know, it would have been really easy to just use normal rats you've seen in the depths, but the developer decided to give these rats a fully custom snowy texture. Absolutely just great attention to detail. My favorite aspect of this level, however, is how everything revolves around this one bonfire. There are two checkpoints, the first one being a door you can open from the other side, and the second a lever you turn to open another path forward, creating a straight line to the boss. Before talking about the boss, I want to point out these skeleton veil enemies. These are widely regarded as one of the worst enemies in the game, and I unfortunately have to agree. The reason why these guys are so bad is because they can stun lock you into a damage animation due to their rolling, killing you easily from just one mistake. This specific room is not that bad, but there is another way worse one later on. They're also just ripped from Berserk. Pretty cool. Priscilla is the boss of the Painted World, and she's actually the only passive boss in the game, requiring you to attack her before beginning the fight. This is because she actually offers to let you return to the real world, as this place is her sanctuary and home, protecting the creatures that exist here. I always feel a bit bad starting this fight, but the fight itself is really underwhelming. Priscilla has a cool gimmick where she turns invisible, and you have to use the snow to find her footsteps. Dealing enough damage reveals her, and at that point the fight is already over. This is a massive shame, because I find bosses who start with gimmicks and later turn into regular fights really interesting. I think Priscilla could have benefited a lot more from expanding her attack pool and buffing her HP, because it is just too easy. I have never died to this boss a single time. And just as the player takes the plunge back into the real world, we're going to take a plunge into the second half of the game, where Dark Souls starts going on a rapid drop of quality. Bonfires are, in some way, my favorite aspect of Dark Souls. There's just something about finding a bonfire and resting at it, hearing the fire crackling and enjoying the moment. The song playing in the background, appropriately titled A Moment's Peace, is my favorite soundtrack in the entire game. This soundtrack only plays in one place, the character creation. Something about this track really relaxes me. It's definitely my most favorite track FromSoft ever released. There's a massive part of me that wishes this song played faintly in the background as you rest at a bonfire, similar to how Reflection plays in Hollow Knight for benches. Something about this concept just gets to me. If you couldn't tell already, I really like Dark Souls, and while the first game isn't my favorite game by FromSoft or even close to my favorite game in general, it's up there. It's a great game. Even this second half we're going to go into is still considered better than a majority of other games, and I kind of agree with that. This video is probably long overdue at this point, but we have a lot left. However, I want to thank you for watching so far. Hope you're doing well. Remember to take a step back sometimes and sit beside your own bonfire. And of course, if you're enjoying it, consider subscribing and joining the Discord. I also probably plan on making a video like this on both Dark Souls 2 and 3, but who knows when that will be ready. Anyways, let us wake up and head into the second half of Dark Souls. During its development, Dark Souls had a really rough time, to the point the game had to be rushed to release on time for the publishers. This is why a lot of these upcoming areas and bosses are just horrible compared to the first half. And while I think the development being rushed was a very major aspect in its drop of quality, nobody can deny the division of the game began shifting to a more linear and oppressive experience. Getting the Lord Vessel meant the players could warp to a majority of available bonfires, and with that came the realization that the game did not need that interconnected world that made it feel magical. Levels could be in a completely different playing field and none of it would matter. This isn't particularly bad by any means, but it goes to show that shifting the direction the game initially headed in so suddenly probably wasn't the greatest idea. After returning to Firelink and speaking to Frampt, he takes us deep below the shrine to a massive gate that leads to the last area of the game. To unlock this gate, however, the player must acquire 4 specific souls of bosses. The location of these bosses are only shown to us in a cutscene, and we must figure out where they are based on that. I like this approach of of not specifically telling us where to go, we know that we have not been to the Demon Ruins yet, New Londo, the graveyard area, and of course that side path in Anor Londo, so I don't think anyone is going to get confused on where to go from here. This method of allowing the player to fight all 4 of these bosses at the same time creates a pretty big pacing problem, which we will talk about a bit later. Before we head out to the first boss, we must take a little detour into Darkroot Basin to obtain a specific ring, and do some setup for the DLC. Darkroot Basin is in a lot of ways just a late game extension of Darkroot Garden, but that does add some unique flavor to the location. The first part of the area upon opening that massive door with the crest of Artorias obtained from Andre is filled with these NPC enemies that are kind of unique to this area. This is where we can find this weird cat covenant thing, which I am going to join just to slay this ninja guy and get his ring. This ring allows the player to do a ninja type of roll, which is much better than the regular roll and is actually faster than walking, so don't be surprised if you see me spam rolling from here on out. Following the path leads us to another massive door, and opening it takes us to another boss battle. This is Sif, the loyal dog companion of Artorias and a really good boss. Sif is quite simple, her attacks are easily avoided if you manage to stay under her legs, but she can do a lot of acrobatics to get away from you if you deal too much damage. While I do think this boss is a bit too easy, there is a great use of environmental storytelling in this fight. When you get Sif extremely low, she will begin to limp and attack you in such a slow motion to the point where her attacks can be easily ignored. This is just a very sad and beautiful detail, and I wish more bosses in the game had mechanics like these, especially ones that are living beings similar to Sif. Let's say the Taurus demon loses his arm or something. The possibilities are there, but I think tail cutting already kinda solved this problem to an extent, so it's not a big deal. Sif drops the ring required to walk in the abyss, and it's why we went here in the first place. Going past these massive cats with weird attacks leads us to a giant pond at the bottom of the basin, which is inhabited by a massive water hydra. While cool visually, this is a horrible fight, because it revolves around a lot of waiting for the heads to slam down while dodging these water projectiles that have a really bad hitbox in a tiny piece of land. That's the whole fight, just 2 attacks. The waiting becomes a problem, especially when there are only a few heads remaining, because sometimes the heads will glitch out when slamming you, making them impossible to hit. I hate this fight. Going across the pond leads us into this watery cave that houses a golden golem after reloading the area. Killing this guy spawns a friendly NPC, which can actually be accidentally killed if you press attack more than twice on the last golem hit. This was also not properly tested, because I can imagine a lot of first time players fell into that trap when they discovered this. This is the Dusk of Ulasil, an NPC required to be rescued in order to access the DLC, and we will get to the DLC eventually, but for now, we shall finally enter New Londo. The ambience of this place is amazing. The fact that there is a massive flooded city under the shrine is already cool in its own, but you can just tell what type of vibe they were going for here and fortunately managed to nail it. We can find the crestfallen warrior here, the guy who used to sit by the fire in the shrine, and reminds us that even he went hollow. The reason for this is pretty vague and hard to piece together, but the widely accepted answer is that he tried to kill the giant serpent in Firelink for reasons that only become clear at the end of the game. Overall, I find his inclusion here really nice. This guy that always made fun of you and laughed in your face telling you that you will never achieve anything has been proven wrong 1,000 times, and him going hollow is really bittersweet. Unfortunately, right after this we can see the true colors of New Londo, which are not very pretty. As soon as you go forward, you will be ambushed by many of these ghost enemies which cannot be hit at all unless you are cursed, leaving you to either run away endlessly like an idiot looking for a way forward in this maze of a location, or tank hits until you die. Fortunately, there is also an item you can use to be able to hit these ghosts for 5 minutes, but I never found this out when I was playing. New Londo is probably my favorite out of the 4 final areas visually, but I can't help but hate these ghosts and the gimmick, especially in enclosed rooms. It is still not a terrible area, and as said before, the aesthetic here is king, but it is largely ruined by these enemies and confusing level design with no checkpoints. The goal of this place is to get to the roof where this guy is, who will give you a key to drain the flood in the area. Doing this opens the path to the boss. To actually enter the boss, the player must wear the abyss ring obtained from Sif. Taking the plunge down into this hole leads us into a pitch black room, before a boss spawns right before our eyes. This boss is known as the Four Kings, and it's a strange boss to talk about. The arena this boss is fought in is very unique, and while there are no unique interactions with it, I don't think that really mattered at all, because the concept of the abyss just being this pitch black void of nothingness really sells the vision well. Similar to the Bell Gargoyles, the Four Kings act as a sort of endgame DPS check. The way to beat this boss is to deal enough damage to each king before the other ones spawn, because if they do, you will be easily overwhelmed and killed. That makes me think that this boss was probably made with the idea that it would be the last boss the player fought before they opened the Lord Vessel door, especially with how convoluted the process of even fighting the boss is. Going to the Basin, getting the ring, going through New Londo, and all that other stuff. The boss is pretty fun, it has well telegraphed attacks for the most part, and they are fun to maneuver around and dodge. But it does have a lot of problems which hold it back. First of all, the boss is honestly way too inconsistent. Some of its attacks deal only a chip of your health, while other attacks that would have the same telegraphs can deal half of your health. This inconsistency is pretty bad, and I would prompt to tanking the weaker attacks while waiting for the big one, and after that the boss will already be dead, giving me plenty of time to heal back to full to tackle the next boss in the same fashion. There is just no challenge. Another problem is just how much waiting this boss has if you kill the lords too fast. Due to how the game is coded, the timer it takes to spawn the next king does not reset after killing the former king. It's just annoying and not much more than that, a lot of waiting. While this is my favorite Lord Vessel boss, it is far from being a great boss, and could have been much better. While New Londo is a much weaker area than the rest of the ones discussed so far, it is still far from the worst. And next on the list is the Duke's Archives, the area where Seed the Scaleless dwells. The Duke's Archives are kind of teased to you throughout the whole game, which is a neat detail when you realize that. Upon entering, there's this weird section with boars. I don't really understand their inclusion here. After that, there's a bonfire before quite a long elevator, and I think this bonfire should have been placed after the elevator to avoid constantly having to wait 20 seconds for the elevator to take you up and down all the time. The enemies found here are crystallized hollows who also have ranged counterparts, with the occasional sorcerer who buffs them. It's kind of simple and not really innovative in that aspect. In this room we can also find this crystal golem looking at a wall. Now, this guy does not appear if you haven't saved Dusk of Ulasil, and this leads me to really hate how the entry to the DLC was handled in this game. I don't understand how any player was meant to figure out that this crystal golem will spawn here after saving Dusk, and it doesn't help how this enemy is a completely regular crystal golem that doesn't seem out of place at all. It's also bad how the golden crystal golem only spawns in the cave after coming back a second time. Most players at that point would assume there is absolutely nothing there and just move on. It leads me to believe that the developers intended for the DLC to be spread through the word of mouth, which makes sense. But from a new player's perspective, this is not great. I think in some ways, Dark Souls is a game that must be played with someone to guide you through it, especially in this case if you wish to avoid spoilers online. And while I'm happy that I've had that someone in my first playthrough, I don't think this was thought out very well. Getting the broken pendant here will allow us to enter the DLC later on, but for now we must continue. The Archives has a lot of verticality in its design, but that's really the only thing going for it. This area is just too mundane compared to the rest of the game. It barely adds any new mechanics to play around, and it's a slog to go through due to how much confusion it can cause. This confusion in layout can be a good thing for some, but I don't think it was done very well, as it forces the player to do a lot of running around to pull a lever or move a bookshelf and stuff like that. The enemy variety here also does not help. They are just too boring. It's why I don't particularly dislike the Archives, but I am far from liking them either. It's just an area I don't look forward to much when I replay the game. Some of the views from the balconies are beautiful though. Going up an elevator leads us into a hallway full of crystals, with a strange crystallized NPC waiting for us. The inclusion of this enemy is a neat detail. I don't really understand why he is here, but he fits the atmosphere of the place and is a fun way to show how the crystals affect people. And finally, we reach the fake out boss, Seed the Scaleless. This fake out boss is designed so poorly to the point I genuinely hate even walking through this fog door. The point of this boss fight is that you're supposed to die. Sif is invincible during this fight and there's nothing you can do to prevent that. It's the first moment in the entire game where the immersion aspect breaks apart, as the game is forcing you into a scripted sequence, which is done really poorly. This is because Sif has attacks that can actually curse you, and as you already know, that has consequences post-death. Another problem is that you actually lose all of your souls if you die here. A common argument used here is that you're supposed to equip the Ring of Sacrifice before walking through the fog door, but I don't understand how a new player is supposed to figure this out before realizing that Sif is invincible, and by that point, they will already be dead, losing all of their souls with no way to get them back. This is a horrible boss fake out. An easier and much better way to do this would have been to play a cutscene when the player reaches 1 hit point, and remove that curse from the attacks. Then this moment could have been way more interesting and unique. Upon dying to Sif, you wake up in a cell, which can be seen as a callback to the beginning of the game in the Undead Asylum. This small section of a prison breakout is also quite poorly designed. The point here is to hit the snake guard while inside of your cell and loot the corpse for the key. This snake enemy has only 1 hit point, and you can kill him with anything really. It's kind of funny, but it doesn't really work in the game game's favor considering all the previous snake enemies were established to be quite dangerous. Leaving the cell plays a strange cutscene. This is the only area in the game where ambient music is used while you're exploring. I always found this section memorable due to the ethereal-like song that plays in the background as these monstrosities are chasing you up the stairs. I don't understand why this specific song was used, but I am not complaining. It's a short and memorable area in the archives that was quite fun to do. These tentacle monstrosities have very little health and can be pretty dangerous if you're not careful, and I like their design. The return of the snake guys in general is kind of interesting and works much better than placing more of those regular reskinned hollows. Escaping the prison lets us re-enter the archives through another path and continue exploring it, which is quite boring. While blocking off a huge portion of the area and letting the player rediscover later can be cool, the return to the archives here offers almost no gameplay changes at all. The enemies are the same and so is the layout. The only different thing is that you're meant to use these levers to rotate stairs around, which I always found kind of frustrating. But that just might be me. There are also a lot of mimics in this place, which is a nice touch. Upon walking out of the archives, we can find a strange little forest area that feels much more empty from the rest of the world. You can easily tell that this area wasn't finished. But I don't think that is what makes it bad. In fact, I find some charm in this little area. It's kind of comforting in a way, and since there is no gameplay significance in it, it doesn't really matter much. The next sub area is the Crystal Cave, and this area has my least favorite run back in the entire game. The area itself is quite unique, but the only enemy you're going to be fighting here are reused crystal golems. The area involves a lot of invisible bridges, which can be fun on a first playthrough, but are a massive chore on replays. This is a recurring theme with the archives. Everything just feels like a chore here. The invisible bridges also have these messages on them telling you what to do, and this just feels wrong. I don't understand how anybody would come here to write messages for others telling them where to go. This entire area would have been really bad if not for these falling particles, which can help guide the player way more than the messages. But of course, there's some really frustrating issues with how easily you can fall off from what looks to be solid ground. A lot of the enemies here also just glitch out and fall off. The enemy AI does not work well at all, and honestly I'm kind of glad it doesn't, because fighting anything in this area is a nightmare. Right before the boss fight itself are these giant clam enemies, and in my opinion, these are the hardest enemies in the entire game. Every single attack they do can stagger you, with some completely knocking you down. They have weird hitboxes and very high health bars. Placing so many of these right before the boss after such an abysmal run back really feels like a screw you to the player, and is much less justified than the Swamp of Blighttown or the Fire Dragon Scare. They have no reason to be here in the game world, and I don't understand their inclusion. You also cannot outrun these guys easily, and slipping into the fog door is really difficult. This is finally where we come face to face with Sif once again, and yeah, it's also a horrible fight. Sif is again initially invincible before you go behind him and break a crystal in one hit. I don't really understand why this crystal is even here. It just takes slightly more time of the fight. I guess it could be a gimmick new players need to figure out, but it's just so easily visible and nobody will miss that there is an interaction with it. Sid himself is a really strange boss. The camera likes to go all over the place here if you lock on, so fighting this boss without lock on is crucial. The main way to actually deal damage is to hit these tentacles, but Sid likes to move a lot, which can screw you up. His attacks are similar to the ones in the fake out boss, still dealing cursed damage and being extremely uncomfortable to avoid. This is also the only time I will ever say this, but Seed has the worst soundtrack out of any boss in the entire franchise. Usually Dark Souls soundtracks are good, sometimes they're okay, but they are never bad. Seed is an exception to this. It's awful. It sounds like some sort of clown circus, but I won't say it doesn't fit this absolute mess of a fight where you're running around like a clown hitting him. I dread this fight a lot when I replay the game. It's my second least favorite boss fight, and for a good reason. It really sucks too with how much this boss has been hyped up in the intro cutscene and all of the lore being connected to him. A massive waste of potential. The next step in our journey is to finally check out the graveyard in Firelink. But before that, we must take a little detour. Back in an old interview, Miyazaki once said that one of the goals when developing Dark Souls was to surprise the player in just how much down you can descend in the world, which is what leads us back to Blighttown. During the player's time in Blighttown, they may have noticed a giant tree on the other side of the swamp. Going into this tree reveals a hollow interior, with an invisible wall hiding a chest. If the player has experience with mimics, they will probably hit this chest before opening it, revealing another invisible wall. I believe this was kind of a deliberate choice by the developers, and it it's a very good one. Following the path leads the player into the Great Hollow. The Great Hollow is a really unique area that utilizes verticality the most out of any in the game, but I don't consider it a fully fleshed out area. The only enemy found here are the lizards, who of course are pretty sucky, but at this point the player should know how to deal with them efficiently. The way to navigate this area is to find your way through the branches, falling down on places you feel are safe. Some people really dislike this area, but I feel the contrary. The area is unique enough to where it feels like its own thing, and I enjoy this unique gameplay element it added when I first played. It doesn't feel extremely boring on replays, but that's mainly because of the area that we are going to get into. Once you reach the bottom of the tree, you will also find these small mushroom enemies and these big guys. Not much to say about them, but they are a nice little addition that just shows how deep life can exist at. Going through the last path in the tree leads us to an opening. Before we are hit with one of the best views in the game, seeing all of these massive trees and realizing we just came out of one as a divine-like soundtrack plays in the background. This is Ash Lake. Ash Lake is my favorite area in the entire game, probably in the entire franchise honestly. This may be a bit shocking due to how much I love Undead Burg and Blighttown, but surprisingly Ash Lake is not my favorite because of the gameplay aspects, more so the presentation and the environmental storytelling it masterfully utilizes. The music is enough to make you instantly know that whatever you just came across, you do not belong here. It is the rock bottom of the world, there is nothing deeper, and that can be a bit disturbing. Sitting at this bonfire with a view of the endless expanding trees and the water is simultaneously the most relaxing and the most terrifying place in the entire game. There's also a lone Hydra in Ash Lake, and I genuinely like the inclusion of it here, no matter how bad the enemy itself is. Don't get me wrong, it's still terrible to fight, but just seeing how small this Hydra looks in comparison to the endless body of water surrounding you is insane. That massive monstrosity in the basin has been turned into nothing in a span of a single reappearance. It makes you wonder just what type of creature could be dwelling deeper in the water. What have you even come across? There's also a really cool and terrifying moment with this Hydra. It can actually jump up in the air and go on the other side, and this really freaked me out when I first saw it, no matter how stupid it looks. The location also has this giant skull which doesn't look like any enemy or boss in the game, making you wonder just what was this creature? Why is it so big? Following the path forward has some clam enemies, and I don't mind their inclusion here either, because it actually makes sense that the water creatures are near water. The end of the path leads deeper into a tree with a dragon covenant. Some people find that having a covenant here at the end is disappointing, and I see where they're coming from, but I have to say that having a boss here that you can actually defeat kind of breaks the atmosphere the area is meant to give, that you do not belong and have no business being here. The simplicity of this area is why it's attractive. Bringing a boss here or some other gimmick would ruin that. Keep in mind that it's entirely optional and pretty hard to discover. There are a lot of theories surrounding Ash Lake. My favorite theory is that all of these trees represent different worlds, holding them high above where you stand, just outside of your grasp of exploration. I like to think that even Bloodborne, Sekiro and Elden Ring are somewhere in this lake, very far away in their own little tree. And while this is definitely not the case, don't get me wrong, this theory is pretty bad, it's a really cool concept that can be taken into your own interpretation, and I really love it. There is a small issue I have to mention with this area however. If you somehow manage to make your way down here without getting the Lord Vessel, getting out of this area is a nightmare. I can only pray for people who do have to go through that pain. While it can be justified as that you're not supposed to be here, I can find it, but I think that this is not very well thought out. But I also can't give a solution to this problem. I think I have thalassophobia, but even so I am intrigued by the ocean and water in general. It's probably why this area both amazes and terrifies me every single time I go through it. Even while replaying the game for this video, it's an amazing area that is fully optional. I refuse to finish the game before going here. It's my favorite part of Dark Souls. But now let us teleport out of the lake and head to the Catacombs. I think there is something really cool about coming back to the graveyard at this state of the game. These skeletons who once looked and felt extremely intimidating pose no threat anymore. It's a nice feeling. Exploring the graveyard more leads us to a tunnel, which is the entry point to the next area. The Catacombs are unique in the sense that it's the first area so far that is much darker than the rest, offering some unique gameplay potential. The skeletons are also a new enemy type, and they are far more complex than any basic enemy in these 4 Lord Vessel dungeons. Even being able to parry you, they're also also these weird floating red skulls. I don't really like them, but not much else to say. The layout of this level is fairly confusing at first. It revolves around turning a lot of switches to open up different paths, and the maze-like structure can be fun on your first time around. It's also very easy to get swarmed by these skeletons, and it happens to me fairly often. The general look of this place feels unique as well. I love that there are these bugs crawling around everywhere and just how bleak and terrible it looks compared to the other areas in the game. The good kind of terrible. However, even so, I find this area a bit of a chore compared to the rest of the game. But personally, I think it's the best out of the 4 Lord Vessel areas. Later on, there are also these necromancer guys who have a cool gimmick to them. They run away and keep respawning skeletons while shooting fireballs at you. Some of the places also have spike traps, which are kind of cool. You can also find Patches here, which is a recurring character in all of From's games. And while I don't really want to talk about him here due to the length of this video already reaching the Stratosphere, I hope I can potentially talk about him in a future Dark Souls 2 or 3 video. So I just kill him here to get the switch. Eventually, while exploring the catacombs, you will reach this wide open area containing many of those Veil guys back in the painted world. And this right here is probably the worst room in the entire game. The problem with this room is that all of these Veil guys will aggro at once, unlike in the painted world where you can isolate them. This creates a massive problem where you will be stun locked over and over with absolutely nothing you can do, and running away is also not easy due to you not knowing when they are coming. This single room is what really brings down the catacombs for me. It is never fun going through it, and I question the wisdom of even including it. The catacombs are just weird. At one point they're actually pretty unique and fun to navigate, but the other they are a nightmare due to how many ganks you will experience in them. To close off this area, we're going to talk about the boss, Pinwheel, and he's already dead. This was initially supposed to be a joke, but I really don't know if there's anything I can say about Pinwheel. I never even saw his attacks because he always, and I mean always, dies in 3 hits and gets stun locked on the second one. That's the issue with Pinwheel. He is the easiest boss in the game by a pretty wide margin, and there's just nothing else to say about it. He does have a pretty cool theme song though, if you can actually hear it. Some people argue that Pinwheel is meant to be fought right after Bell Gargoyles or even the Capra Demon, and while that argument initially makes sense, you have to realize that the catacombs are a mid, mostly late game area. This is not an easy area for newcomers, and getting through it is painful. It is also painful getting stuck here without a Lord Vessel. Going in here just to fight Pinwheel is stupid. Defeating Pinwheel, or well, embarrassing him, opens the way to the Tomb of the Giants, which is on par with Lost Izalith as my least favorite area in the entire game. The reason why I hate Tomb of the Giants so much is just how dependent it is on a gimmick, that being lack of light. If you do not have a lantern, an item randomly dropped by the necromancers, or the bug helmet obtained from Lost Izalith, this place is a nightmare to go through, and I've deliberately chosen to go through it without these tools. But even with the light, it is still just annoying. I find the inclusion of these skeleton dogs breathing from distance quite creepy, and they can be pretty fun the first time around. But then you realize that they have a really bad moveset that is not well utilized by the area you fight them in, as you can easily roll off the edge due to how dark the area is. The way to get to the boss is to use these platforms. There's a lot of trial and error here because you just cannot see where the platform is even with the lantern, and it's really bad. Finally, getting out of this dark and horrific part of the area leads us into an opening where we can see the demon ruins and the Ash Lake. It's a cool way to show some spark of interconnectivity after all this time. The run back to the boss is also horrible, unfortunately. It really sucks how Pinwheel was completely reused for some reason as a regular enemy. It makes the encounter far less unique than it originally felt, no matter how easy it was. Just a really bad decision by the developers. Going into the boss fight itself, you're forced to fall down from this cliff and lose about half of your health bar every single time. I don't know why this was forced upon the player, and it feels extremely unfair even if it's not a big deal in the fight itself. It forces the player to use a flash charge that could have been used better. The boss itself is of course Nito, Lord of the Dead, one of the best designs in the whole franchise, yet a massive lackluster of a boss. Nito is the definition of wasted potential. He could have been so much more considering he's the personification of death, and maybe having him curse you would actually make sense, even though that seems like a bad idea, never mind. Nito tends to spawn a lot of adds and has really basic attacks with his sword. Sometimes he will do a full ground clear where he kills the adds and does massive damage to you. I find this boss a massive chore to fight, and I truly wish this boss was actually fleshed out and given a correct moveset that could complement that sick design, rather than being this boredom of an encounter. After slaying death itself somehow, we're finally ready to take a trip into the worst part of Dark Souls, the demon ruins and of course Lost Izalith. What you may have noticed so far is that every single Lord Soul we obtain becomes easier and easier. That is because these bosses were designed to be non-linear, allowing the player to approach them in whatever order they wish to. This is a massive double-edged sword. It allows for some freedom in player decision, but it does a lot more negative than positive. The bosses the player fights will always eventually get easier to deal with, because the player scales as the game progresses and these bosses do not. They stay the same. Maybe a fix exists, like scaling these bosses based on the ones you kill first, but that's a bit convoluted to work around. Overall, I think it was a miss in the game design department and there's not much else to say about it. We have already once been at the Demon Ruins at the early stages of this video, and damn, it feels like a while has passed since then. I always like how you can see these tentacles on the next boss from a distance. It makes this area look way more intimidating than it actually is. The gimmick of the ruins is lava, which will kill you if you try to walk on it for too long. I despise the sound effect the lava gives. It is so obnoxious and horrid, and I honestly wanted to mute the game. I also apologize for what I am about to do, but the first boss in the area is the Ceaseless Discharge, a boss required to defeat in order to petrify the lava instantly, I don't know. This charge is unfortunately another extreme pushover compared to the rest of the bosses, and is probably the second easiest boss in the game. He only has one attack and he can be cheesed in numerous ways, so I wouldn't waste my time talking about him too much. Cool design, not well utilized. Unlocking the rest of the area reveals just how rushed the Demon Ruins were in comparison to the rest of the game. Probably the most rushed out of any area. These Taurus demons are spammed throughout the area just standing there, doing nothing. It makes no sense and it's really funny, but it's just horrible to fight them. However, on a more positive note, I will praise the game where it's due, because the Taurus demons and Capra demons being regular enemies in the Demon Ruins makes a lot of sense. It makes sense that some demons manage to make their way to the surface, and due to their big size, they can be considered bosses by an early game player. It's great environmental storytelling. Capra demons are also spammed without any direction, so that's bad too. Following the path forward, we can get to a ruin, which introduces two new enemy types, which are both pretty bad. These cringy rock demon statues that offer no challenge, and these massive worms that are just super obnoxious to fight and can inflict a parasite on you. Overall, not a massive improvement from the enemy spam, but there is just one positive aspect about this area. If you stand over this ledge, you can see a massive fossil or skeleton of some sort of demon. This will be relevant foreshadowing later, which I like a lot. This leads into another boss fight, the Demon Fire Sage, the final reskin of the Asylum demon, and a really bad example of how not to reuse content. The stray demon Burg, because she showed the player how far they had come after returning to the Asylum. Additionally, it was teased right from the beginning. This boss does none of that. It has absolutely no purpose in the game. An empty room would have been better. It's absolutely pathetic, and I swear to God, I can never see this guy do a single fire attack because I just kill him too fast. I ran into this fight with half health and no flash charges, yet still won easily. I appreciate that the idea of the Demon Ruins was to try to throw most bosses in the game at you, but just reusing bosses like this without any purpose to the fight is horrible. If this boss was actually intended to be here, giving him a proper unique design and moveset would have been needed. You can unlock a shortcut here back to Quaylag's domain, but at this point shortcuts are mostly disregarded by the player, especially with Bonfire warping, so I don't see much reason for this at all. Right after the Fire Sage, we are led to the third boss fight of the Demon Ruins, the Centipede Demon. As said before, this boss was actually foreshadowed earlier before the Fire Sage, and it's great foreshadowing. I love how this fossil comes back to life after you enter the arena and attacks you, but unfortunately, that is all this boss is. Just great foreshadowing and cool design with no substance. The Centipede Demon is tedious. He takes a while to get to you due to his range attack, and when he does, the camera goes all over the place to the point where locking on would kill you immediately. It has some extremely weird attacks that don't make sense, and the lava is just too annoying. There's barely any land to stand on and fight him, and I honestly question how this boss is intended to be defeated. I just spammed the attack button and it dies after a few hits tanked. Killing this terrible boss, we arrive at, you guessed it, Lost Izalith, the worst area in Dark Souls. The Centipede Demon drops the ring, which allows us to walk on lava, no idea why, we don't question it, and as soon as you enter Lost Izalith, you will notice that this area is the biggest victim of rush development. There are these giant dragon asses everywhere, which are actually called the Bounding Demons of Izalith, by the way, you can tag me later, and trust me, I love some of that, bad, but this is just too much, man. Jokes aside, these enemies are horrible to fight. Running past them is kind of mandatory if you still wish to retain your sanity, because I am going insane every moment I have to speak about this area. Lost Izalith was originally intended to be a swamp, and this would make a lot of sense lore-wise due to the Witch of Izalith and the Chaos Daughters loving swamps for some reason. But this was cut from the main game due to massive time constraints. I don't think I would have preferred if Izalith was a swamp, but it would have been a lot better than what we got. There's actually a lot of cut enemies and layouts for this area that never made it into the game. Quite a shame due to how unique some of these look. The city of Izalith itself is just a bunch of demon statue spam and this new unique enemy. I actually like these guys. They have a cool grab attack, and I think more types of this unique enemy design could have been implemented. Just such a waste of potential, man. There's a unique fight with an NPC here before the boss. A lot of people say that this is one of the hardest NPCs in the game, but I just don't see it. I think it's kind of unique that there is something else here at the end, but it is honestly unnecessary and makes the run back more daunting than it actually is. I love the architecture of Lost Izalith. I really wish this area was given proper time and care as the other areas. Perhaps then it could have been the best area in the entire game. Wow, saying that Lost Izalith may have been the best area in the entire game sounds so wrong. And finally, after such a long time, we are finally here, baby. Bed of Chaos. The slide to the Bed of Chaos is cool in a first playthrough, however, just dying to this boss one time shows how annoying this can get. Paired with the run back, sliding down this slope is one of the most boring experiences I've ever had in this game. Especially because the slide is so unfinished, it doesn't even make a sound. Like, what is the point of this? Please, for the love of God, just let me go down. The boss itself is for very good reasons regarded as the worst boss in Dark Souls, if not in the entire franchise. It's probably the most discussed boss in the series, so I'll mainly give a brief rundown and then give my thoughts. It's a massive gimmick fight that involves a lot of platforming in a game not intended for platforming. The goal of the fight is to destroy these two cores to open the path to the middle. However, the problem with this is how hard it is to see what the Bed of Chaos is actually doing. The floor collapsing in this fight ends up in the boss knocking you into the holes, due to it knocking you back with every attack it does, every single time. It feels like the developers themselves didn't know what to do with this boss, as the cores you destroy actually save in each run, so less pain in that aspect, I guess. The hardest thing about this boss is the final jump you have to make in order to reach the middle. It's pure nightmare fuel and I despise it. Now, we all know that the bed is the worst boss in the game. I can keep ranting about it on and on forever about every single bad thing about this fight that I hate. But that's not actually the point here. At one point, it actually wasn't that bad. Originally, the Bed of Chaos was intended to be fought as a regular enemy with no gimmicks. It has a fully animated moveset, and just look at how unnatural and terrifying it looks with the insect wings and extremely strange posture. It's such a shame that this boss had a chance to be really unique in a good way and actually fun to fight. Same with Lost Izalith in general. Perhaps there is a parallel universe out there where this area was finished, but who knows? We were robbed. The base game of Dark Souls is a mixture of highs and lows, and by this point, there is only one boss remaining. It is kind of sad ending this video on a negative penultimate chapter, so before tackling the ending, we must be dragged into the past. After the worldwide success of Dark Souls, a decision was made to add additional content to the game post-release. A DLC is usually made with the intent to allow the developers to tie up loose ends and add more stuff they wish to add in the base game but couldn't. This is especially true in Dark Souls, where the DLC brought that missing spark from the late game that was very much needed. It is kind of common knowledge that DLCs usually outshine the base game in FromSoft catalog. In fact, I believe that every single DLC they have released is in a lot of ways better than the base game, except Sekiro because it didn't get one. I kind of believe that in a way, every single From game is unfinished in some aspects. Dark Souls is the biggest victim to this, but DLCs allow From to add that missing content to their games, which works in their favor at the end. After interacting with a strange portal in the Basin Cove, a massive limb shows up and drags us into it, leading the player into the Sanctuary Garden. This introduction is unique in the sense that it already builds anticipation. Just what is the thing that dragged you and where does this portal lead? As soon as you step outside, you are greeted by a boss fight. I think this was the best way they could have opened up the DLC, especially after such a lackluster of the endgame. The boss is the Sanctuary Guardian, a white lion inspired by a manticore or chimera, depending on how you look at it, and the fight itself is exhilarating. It is instantly clear to you just how much faster everything is compared to the base game, and that your reflexes are going to be put to the test by the utmost. This is a common occurrence in FromSoft games. Their DLCs are usually quite harder than the base game, and I think that's fine. It is obviously content intended for people who want more challenges, so it works well. The boss fight itself, while being fairly simple, goes to show just how much an improvement there is in how the boss feels and acts. The telegraphs are also quite exceptional. The boss just feels good to fight. Bonus points for the tail inflicting poison. This is one case where a boss inflicting status ailments makes a lot of sense. Defeating the Guardian lets the player truly enter the DLC, as the next area we're looking to is the Royal Wood. This level is instantly going to spark curiosity in the player, as it looks exactly like the Darkroot Basin, just that it's daytime and the enemies populating it are quite different. This is because the DLC actually takes place in the past, and the player should notice this quite soon, especially with these stone enemies being the exact same as the ones in Darkroot Garden. The enemies themselves are very simple, but unique in their own way. The tree caretakers are an enemy comparable to the ones in Darkroot, but these guys use a piercing attack. The stone soldiers are also a lot harder compared to the earlier equivalent, which makes sense. They have gotten older and more stiff as time went on. While this is a pretty open level on the surface and allows for very little unique design elements, I think it served its purpose in the game world fairly well. I really like when media allows us to see into the past and connect things to how they came to be in the future. DLCs in FromSoft games usually struggle with connectivity with the base game, and I think this is probably the only DLC that managed to do that aspect really well. A moment I have to mention happens on this small bridge, where a massive black dragon with a strange and terrifying eye will fly down to greet you before flying away. This moment is very reminiscent of your first steps into Undead Burg, and again, it only makes me wish more of these world events were used. It also just shows how far you have come. This dragon is likely to be 10 times more intimidating and scarier than the pushover that was the Red Drake, and we will get to him more in depth later. As you get closer to the Colosseum in the distance, you will notice these cracks in the earth that invoke abyssal energy, instantly making the main theme of the DLC clear to you. I also find this little idle animation of the caretakers really cute. Going down the elevator takes us to the boss itself and my favorite NPC in the whole game. The marvelous Chester is such an enigmatic NPC. His voice actor and personality really killed their role, and I just want to gush about him. I honestly love the theory that this guy came straight out of Bloodborne's world. Snatched by a shadowy arm, the player gets dragged by in the cutscene. Bloodborne has started development right after the DLC, so it is very possible that Chester was somehow the predecessor to it, or a teaser. And even if this is likely not the case, I like to believe it is, because of how much I love him. And just when it couldn't get any better, it gets better, as the next boss is my favorite in the entire game. Knight Artorias is iconic. There is no better word to describe him, and for a good reason. As one of the great knights of Gwyn, he was tasked to defeat the spreading abyss in the lands, but succumbed to it instead. It's kinda weird looking at this figure of legend the game teases in multiple ways all this time, completely broken and insane. I guess that's what Dark Souls is all about. Artoria is definitely the fastest boss in the entire game. A lot of his attacks leave very little punish windows, and he's extremely inspired by guts. At first glance, this fight can be frustrating, even unfair, but once you fight him more and more, you learn. His attacks are insanely readable and, more importantly, very fun to dodge and punish when given the opportunity. He is kind of a mirror of the player character, being able to dodge roll and do attacks similar to ours, and also dealing the most damage in the entire game. One attack from Artorias is enough to screw up your entire health bar, making the fight very reliant on mastery. Artorias also does an abyssal roar type of attack during different stages of the fight, showing how much the abyss is affecting him, which can be a great punish window if set up properly. I'm not entirely the biggest fan of the soundtrack in this fight, but I think it fits the battle well, considering that this is supposed to be a melancholic fight rather than an epic one. This legendary figure is just a shadow of his former self, and you have to put his insanity to rest. Defeating Artorias only leaves the player thinking, just what type of force are you actually facing? What is the abyss? How was this legendary warrior corrupted by it? This is what leads us into the city of Ulasil, completely consumed by the abyss. Ulasil Township is my favorite area of the DLC, and is also the most traditional one, being a pretty linear path through a town with insane people. The enemies introduced here are erratic, almost primal types of humans that have lost their mind and gone insane. It's a great enemy design that is complemented by the laughter and weird moveset. They work really well. There are also these corrupted mages that I like a lot less, but I do believe there is some charm in them as well, using dark magic to their advantage with great placement. Opening a chest in this room gives us a crest which can be used to unlock a locked door in the Colosseum, which becomes our next destination before continuing forward. However, I do have to mention that Ulasil has this one unique enemy found nowhere else in the entire DLC, the Chained Prisoner, which is just weird, but I really appreciate the inclusion of this thing here. The setup for fighting Calamid, the black dragon seen earlier, is great. Talking to Go allow us to watch how he hunts dragons, which is just one of the best moments in the entire game. This is the actual way to fight the boss, because fighting him while he's in the air is miserable. Calamid is a boss I actually skipped on my first playthrough, don't remember why, and I was fighting him for the first time in this video. I don't have much to say about about him because I beat him on my first try and had a good time, but a lot of people say that this boss is quite difficult, and I can see why. From my time fighting him, I really enjoyed it. I think the grab attack is on more of a unique side and it's fine. This is actually really the only dragon fight in the game, and the fact that it is a good dragon fight is an achievement on its own. The last area we are going to look into is the Chasm of the Abyss, which is also technically the last level in the game. This level shares some similarities with the Tomb of the Giants, however, with the fact that you can actually see what is going on. Doing this is enough to make this level feel unique in its own way without feeling frustrating, and that is pretty good. This level introduces one last enemy type. These floating dark spirits representing humanity itself, and honestly they are one of my favorite enemies in the game just for their design and simplicity. I also really like how the red eyes of the corrupted show up in the darkness. Following a secret path with a strange cat leading us to it, we can reach a younger version of Sif, scared and sealed in a shield provided by Artorias. Killing every enemy here allows us to free Sif, which is a really cool moment that shows how these two used to be great companions, and why Sif values Artorias so much. I think there is something really fitting about the Dark Corrupted Chasm being the final level of this game. It is the final challenge the player finds themselves in before reaching the first flame. Fighting this ever-spreading corruption even the legendary Artorias could not contain. Wondering just what is at the bottom of this chasm waiting for you. I really like how you can see a bit of a teaser for the upcoming boss. A pair of many red eyes watching you from down below. After walking through the fog gate, you are snatched by the same limb and dragged down into the darkness. Manus, Father of the Abyss, is widely regarded as the hardest boss in the game. And while that is not true for me, as Big O and Estel took longer and so did Artorias, he is my favorite boss design. Manus just looks insanely cool. He was once a man who was transformed into this primal abyssal monster, causing chaos through the lands. The boss fight itself is quite good. I really like the way Manus is animated to be frantic yet readable. His chain combo stun lock attack is also the only one in the game with this interaction, and is quite memorable in that matter. I have a few problems with his staff attacks in phase 2 though, especially the one where he summons a circle of darkness that you are somehow supposed to dodge, which I could never really understand. This is not a big deal though. I think Manus kind of serves as a true final boss of Dark Souls, and he really fits that role perfectly. What I especially like is how I always defeat this boss with a clutch moment, every single time. After defeating Manus, Dusk of Ulasil will appear once again, pretty much unconscious and exhausted. Later on you can learn that she actually thought Artorias was the one who saved her from the grasp of the Abyss. And honestly, throughout this whole game, you aren't really given any credit for your actions, no matter what you do. The only time you've been given proper guidance and credit were times of illusion, an illusion of who you are. There is no chosen undead, and at this point that has become clear to you a long time ago. So now you may be asking yourself, what is even the point of doing anything in this entire game? Alright, this video has been going on and on for too long now. I've also lost my voice. Let's get over this. After giving the 4 souls to the Lord Vessel, a path opens up to you. A path through this white portal thing which looks cool, leading to the kiln of the first flame, the final area the player will see in Dark Souls. This is a very simple area, but I love the ambience of it and just how imposing it looks. This is where it all began and where it will all end, or so you think. The only enemies in this area are Black Knights, placed here to show you just how far you've come. These knights offer no challenge anymore. Some people tend to dislike this run back since it can be fairly long, but I don't really mind it. The Black Knights are fun to fight and there's really not any reason to rush. And finally arriving and crossing the fog gate leads us to the final boss of Dark Souls, Gwyn. There is no introductory cutscene, there is no build up. It starts out of nowhere as you hear the piano playing in the background. Gwyn has gone hollow, indistinguishable from countless undead you slew on your way here, and now you have come to finish the job. Before I continue talking about this fight, there is just one last piece of criticism I must throw at Dark Souls, and for that I sincerely apologize to Gwyn personally. Gwyn is the only fight in the whole game where the preferred way is to parry him, because if you don't, his attacks can dispatch you extremely easily, leaving almost no open windows to heal and making him one of the toughest bosses in the game. This boss took me the most tries to beat out of any in this playthrough. However, if you actually do parry him, Gwyn is the biggest pushover in the whole game. The issue here is that this is never ever told to you, or even hinted at. No other boss in the game can be parried, so a player assuming that you can parry Gwyn is just not gonna happen. I wonder if the original intent for this was to never make Gwyn seem like a pushover, but I don't know. The parry thing was spread via word of mouth, and I really do not like that a first time player will 99% of the time miss this interaction. It is sad looking at this legendary figure, the one who threw this lightning spear in the introductory cutscene, the one who ruled over the divine city of Anor Londo, the one who united the lands, gone hollow, fighting you without a single thought and direction. This man is so afraid of the dark to the point where he refused to leave the kiln, confining himself to this prison, and his soundtrack is the simplest yet most telling one in the whole OST. A piece only played on white keys with no darkness to taint it. A piece that you can only truly appreciate if you got this far yourself. Gwyn doesn't have any cool death cutscene or even a shred of something. The victory achieved text feels cheap and undeserved, and there are really no words to explain this feeling. A bit earlier I asked the question of why. Why have we even gone through this? Why have I even bothered to make this long ass video about a game that has been talked about so much by so many different people? Well, it's a tough question to answer. Dark Souls has two endings. The first ending is linking the flame, and the second one is walking away. Walking to the darkness as these primordial serpents greet the player and manipulate them to do their bidding. This is not the ending we're going to focus on, because linking the flame is just, it's linking the flame, okay? But here's the thing, none of these endings really matter. It's you either following the prophecy and linking the flame, being told what to do, or go out to be manipulated by these serpents. No choice is truly yours. And that's the end of Dark Souls. You just link the flame and disappear. The credits just play as a great song greets you. There are no post-credit scenes, there are no explanations, that's it. When I first played this game, this ending kind of sucked in my head. I thought it was too abrupt and didn't make much sense. But if you really think about it for a bit longer, everything kind of makes sense. As said in the beginning, Dark Souls is at its core a game about persistence, about facing the problem standing ahead of you and not giving up no matter the odds stacked against you. Most of the time you are not going to have a solution to that problem, but you must take inventory. You must look around you for tools and opportunities you can use to make your journey easier, just like Miyazaki had to do while developing Demon Souls. And when you do solve those problems, the feeling is legendary. Throughout the whole game, you'll literally be a nobody, someone left in a cell to rot away with the rest of the world until the end of time. You have, however, achieved many things. You have defeated the legendary warriors of Anor Londo, you have taken down the greatest figures of the world, you have taken down Abyss itself, and finally you have stood before the king himself, the one who started it all, only to realize he has also become a nobody. But at the end of it all, you burned away. Return to being nothing, just like Gwyn. Return to being nameless. This is why the credit song is called the Nameless Song. It is a song about you, the player. Linking the flame and sacrificing your life to prolong the world may seem abrupt and even stupid, but everything comes to an end eventually. And even if nobody in this world has appreciated the things you have done, you yourself found that appreciation within yourself. You know just how great the things you achieved are and that you can achieve more. There is a chance that this world may turn out to be a better place in the future thanks to your sacrifice, no matter how many times you've been manipulated by others, no matter how many times you have struggled to complete your task, no matter how many times you have died against the bed of chaos, and even if you will not be there to see it, others will, and they will appreciate it. They will remember it. If you've enjoyed this video, and trust me, I really appreciate it if you managed to make your way to the end, make sure to subscribe with notifications and join the Discord, link in description. Dark Souls is to many people their comfort game, the game that got them out of a tough time in life, and while it is not that for me, it is definitely a great game in its own way, no matter how unfinished it is on the outside, and I hope I did it justice. It has a great thing to say, and it says that exceptionally well. Now I'm gonna consider not talking for the next few days, and as always, take care of yourselves and have a good night. Oh wait, there is Dark Souls 2, never mind.